Welcome to the next lecture of our Selenium with C#.NET course. And in this lecture, we'll be talking about data-driven testing using JSON and NUnit. If you remember in our last video, while we were discussing about data-driven testing using NUnit, using the test case source, we tried to create the data source using the hard-coded value using this IEnumerable of login model, login method, or something like this. We yield returned all the login models, something like this. And then we try to iterate through all the different combinations of data within our page object model code, something like this. So this was quite neat because we could able to now enhance our way that we could able to run the test. So we can also see that we could able to perform different combinations of testing with different data set using this particular testing over here, as you can see. So that was the way that we used in our test case source using NUnit. But now we don't want to create the data in a hard-coded fashion over here. My requirement has changed. My team leader has asked me to perform a data-driven testing using an external file, which is a JSON file, instead of writing it all in the class file, something like this. So how could I actually do that? Well, in order to do that, let's assume that we have a JSON file over here. So I'm going to create a new item and I'm going to call this as login.json, something like this. And this particular JSON file is going to have an username as admin, and it also has got a password as password, something like this. So this is the data that I have got, which I wanted to use this particular JSON file within my test over here that I have written. So how do I actually do that? So in order to do this, first of all, we need to read the data from the JSON file, and then we need to perform some deserialization, because you know that this particular data that we have, the username and password, is pretty much aligned to our login model that we have got. You can see that we have a username and we have got a password, and the case is also matching pretty much like how it is defined in the JSON file. I mean, you don't have to worry about the case matching because you also have some option to ignore the case match, something like that. So now all we have to do is to read this JSON file and we have to use it within our code. So the idea is this. I'm going to open an MS Paint. I need to perform this. I need to read the JSON. And once I read the JSON, I then need to perform certain parsing operation. So this is going to be the parse. So let's make this as like this. Parse the JSON. And once I parse the JSON, I then need to deserialize this parsed JSON. So basically this is going to parse the JSON, and we can also say and deserialization. So that is what I mean about the parsing over here. And once I deserialize the data, I then can use the data within my test operation. So that's going to be using the data. So that is the whole idea that I wanted to do. So these are 3 steps that I need to do within my test right now, and we'll see how we could able to actually achieve that. So in order to do that, the first thing is to read the JSON file. So where is this JSON file currently sitting? It's currently within my directory over here. But every time while the test runs, you know, in .NET world, all the code actually sits in the bin directory. So if you just open this project in a folder, something like this, you will notice that we have this .NET code that we have been writing all these days. It also has got a bin folder and an obj folder. So don't worry about the obj folder for now, just worry about the bin folder. So within this bin folder, we also have a debug folder, and in this debug folder, we have a net 8.0 folder because we are using .NET 8. So this is the net 8.0 folder. And in this net 8.0 folder, we have quite a lot of files over here, and some of them are like the DLL files. And one of the DLL which we are interested in is this one, the .NET Selenium.dll. This is exactly matching our project name, as you can see, and that is the DLL which is created over here. And most importantly, you also notice there are many different DLL files which are required for your test to run. For example, the Microsoft Test Platform core utilities. It will also have the NUnit engine. It will also have the Newtonsoft JSON DLL file. And you also see that there is a WebDriver.dll, which is the one that we added for our Selenium test. Also the support.dll. So all these DLL files make your test to be up and running. And now this is the place where the test actually runs really. So in order for you to read the JSON file as well, the one which you have created, you actually need to make sure that this file is accessible for your test to be executed within your code. So in order to do that, there is a easy little trick that you can do within your Visual Studio is you can just right click the file and go to the properties. Now within this property, you can set the copy to output directory as copy always. So once you do this and once you save this, what will happen is right now you will notice that we don't really have a login.json, anything like that. So if I just say login, you see that there is no matching item in your search. But now if I try to build the solution, you will notice that it is going to copy paste the login.json file. So now if I go search login, you'll notice that we have a login.json file this time. And this is coming up over here because we have this particular file being copied to the output directory. And that is what I mean about copying the files to the output directory. So now we have this particular file within this particular directory. Now I know that this login file is within this particular directory. So now the first operation that we need to do based on our diagram is to read the JSON file. So we have prepared the JSON file and now we will read it. So in order to read the JSON file, I'm actually going to write a private method over here. So I'm going to say private read JSON file. And this method is going to read from the path that we have. So you know that the current execution of this particular DLL files happen to run in what is called as an app domain. So this is one of the most important thing which tells you where is your applications executes. So this is the DLL file really. So our execution of the code is basically a DLL file. So we can get the executables from here. So app domain, and there is something called as current domain, which is going to give you the current application domain thread, and you can use the base directory. So this is going to give you the bin directory of your DLL file. So this is the location that we really wanted to get the JSON file itself, because we know that our current code is executing in the bin directory as we just saw over here, which is this one, right? So this is the place where our JSON file is also sitting, the login.json file. So now I'm actually going to do this kind of code. So just follow along with me. You will understand what I'm trying to write over here. So string JSON file path is equal to path is another class that you can use to perform these operations. You can just say combine method, and now you can say app domain dot current domain dot base directory. So you're basically going to combine this directory structure with the login.json file. So once I do that, what I really tell in this code is that I wanted to combine this whole file path, this directory, with the login directory so that I will get the until the bin directory slash login.json file. This is what this JSON file path really tells me. So once this is clear, you know that this is the file that we are trying to read. So we got the path right now. And now we need to read the JSON file. So how do I actually read in C# world? Well, the way that you can read is, I'm just going to say var string, which is JSON string, and I can say file dot read all text method. So this will read a text file in the complete text format. And guess what? Our AI is automatically telling me that this is the method that I need to use, and this is the parameter that I have to pass. So I'm going to hit the tab, it auto completes everything for me. So that is going to be the reading operation. That's the first one. And once we have read that, we also need to parse the JSON file or deserialize the data. So what do you mean by parsing the data? So now if you try to debug this particular code, what you will get it is you will get the path of this particular JSON file, and you will get the content of the JSON file over here. But I wanted to use this JSON file pretty much like this particular login model type, because I wanted to use like a strongly type, like login model.username, login model.password, like how I used within my existing test in the test data source over here. That's exactly what I wanted to use even this time, like a strongly type. So how do I actually do that? Well, in order to do that, you need to deserialize. That is what we say in the JSON world. is to deserialize the text to the specific type. So the way that we can do it is, I'm going to say var login model is equal to, I'm going to say JSON serializer. So there are two types of JSON serializer available. As you can see, one is the system.text.json, another one is the newtonsoft.json. Now people are trying to use the system.text.json because this is available within the .NET. The newtonsoft.json is a third-party library, quite popular among the .NET community. People were using this all this time, but now Microsoft has introduced their own. So I'm going to go with the one that is available by default, and I'm going to use this method called as deserialize. And guess what? The AI is also intelligent enough to tell me that we need to use the deserialize with the login model, and then we need to pass the JSON string over here. This is absolutely correct code. So I'm just going to hit the tab to autocomplete and get this particular code suggestion. It is correct. So we need to deserialize the JSON string to the login model. So what it essentially does is it is going to parse the JSON file, and it is going to convert the JSON string to the login model type, which is interesting, right? Like you get this particular text to the login model type. And once we get that, I can also show you how it looks like with a console.writeLine of the login model. For example, the $username is going to be the login model.c. I can use the username over here, and then I can also use the password, something like this. So you will know what I'm trying to write over here. So this is the way that I can do it. And let me try to read this private.json file, the setup over here. I'll say read JSON file. I'm just going to read this in the constructor just to show you how it is going to look like really. And let me try to run this test. I will show you what I really mean about that. So if I debug this test, you see that it is reading the file, and now the JSON string is going to be like a text of username as admin and password as password. This is the one that we have in the JSON file. And then once we step over, you see that the login model right now is deserialized to the username as admin and the password as password. This is because we have now deserialized to this particular value. So now if I do a console.writeLine, you'll notice that the username is admin and the password is password. So this is the way that we could able to get the value out, something like this, from the deserialization. So now you got the idea of what I'm trying to do over here, right? But that is not it that we wanted to do. We need to use this data within our test over here. Guess what? I can actually use this 2 lines of operation within my existing test over here, and then I can read it like this, and instead of TestCaseSource, I can directly say with JSON data, and I can get rid of this whole thing, and I can copy this whole stuff here, and I can use the login model.username and login model.password over here to perform the operation with the login operation using the JSON data over here. So this is one valid test. I mean, I'm not saying this is not going to work. This is going to work without any problem. So you see that we now have the JSON file being read, deserialized, and this login model.username will have the value of admin and the password as password. So this is going to work as expected. So you can try it out yourself if you wanted to. It's just going to work. But the idea right now is we wanted to use this JSON value that we have read within our test data source that we have over here. So how do I actually do that? Well, in order to do this, I'm just going to write another method over here. I'm going to say login JSON data source, something like this. This is another method. But instead of we do an yield return from the login model like a hard-coded value, we are going to read it from the JSON value. So in order to do that, I'm going to copy these 3 lines of code. I'm going to paste it over here. So we have this login model this time, and we need to do an yield return this time. So I'm going to say yield return of the login model, something like this. So this is going to return me the login model as a JSON data source. This is what I mean about getting the data out from the login JSON file using the test case data source. So I'm going to copy this JSON data source over here, and I'm going to paste or replace the existing data source of login with the login JSON data source. And hopefully this code should just work pretty much like how it worked before from this one. So I know you got some question like currently we only have one username. How about the others? Just give me 1 second. Let me try out this code first before we go further. So now we go and run this test. So this is going to use the data source of the JSON file this time, if everything works. There we go. It worked. And the test got passed. So it read the data from the JSON file and it has pasted that over here. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go a level further, and I'm going to the JSON file over here. So since we have like just only one admin username password, what if I wanted to use different combination of data? So I need to make this JSON as an array like this. And within this array, I also need to create multiple data set. So I'm going to say another username, which is going to be admin. And then I'm going to say password as this one. So I'm going to use the same password that doesn't harm because it's not going to work anyways. So I'm going to do that. And I can keep on pasting any number of data that I wanted to. So I can say admin2, and then I can say admin3. So there are multiple data sets over here that I have got. And now if I wanted to use this within my data source over here, but this code is not going to work with the multiple data that we have got, because we know that we have deserialized with just the login model. I'll tell you what I really mean about that. So let me put a breakpoint over here, and let me try to run the same test that we have executed before. So I'm going to debug this. So you will notice that it's going to read the file and it's going to get the JSON string. You see that this time we got an array of data here, which is quite cool. You see that it's a whole array. And now if I try to deserialize, you will see that we're going to get an exception. It tells me that the JSON value could not be converted to the login model, and there is a byte position, blah, 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 which you probably don't understand unless until you go through the whole message. So it says you that the JSON value could not be converted to a .NET Selenium login model because the actual value, the text value, is basically an array type. So you can see that it has like a whole array of data. So you need to now parse this whole login model as a list of login model. So now we are using a collection here. So in C# world, list is basically a collection type. So you see that once I hover there, it tells you that system.collection.generic list. So we're using a generic list to convert the login model to the list type over here. So once I do this, it will now start working for you as expected. But because we have converted this to a list, I know it's kind of confusing. Just hold tight with me again. We actually need to use a for each loop to get all the value one by one, pretty much like how we did over here, because we don't have to do all these operations in the existing data source because it's all going to be yield returned. We have to read the data and then we have to yield return each of them every single time using a for each loop. So I'm going to say for each of var login data in login model, and I'm going to say yield return me the login data, something like this. So this is the code that I wanted to convert it to. So this is going to read all the list of data, run through the iteration, and return every single value one by one every single time while the data source is going to be called over here in the test case source. Those things are going to be taken care because we have used the yield keyword. So you don't have to worry about like when that first data is going to be taken care, like how we did in this case. That's exactly how this operation is going to work over here as well. That is the power of the test case data source. Awesome. So now let's try to run the same test again and see if that is going to work for us as expected. So now you see that it's going to open the first test, and there we go. It failed. but it's failing for a different reason, I guess. So let's see. At least it's iterating through them, but to me it seems like there is some other problem. It says that the JSON value of this particular model could not be converted again to the login model. Oh, I know why. Because you remember we have to remove this read JSON file from here because it's in the constructor. That's why the test is actually failing. Sorry about that. Let me run this again. Yeah, there we go. So it performed the admin operation and boom. The second one is going to be eventually admin 1. There we go. So which means it is reading the data for us from the JSON file this time, which is amazing. And it has performed all the operation for us over here. So these are all happening because of our JSON file that we have got until admin 3, and our test has executed until 3 operations over here, which is awesome. So this is how we can perform the data-driven testing using JSON value and using the test case source of the NUnit to read the data from the JSON value itself instead of the hard-coded value that we tried doing in our last video. Hope that makes sense, and hope you have understood how you can also read the data from a JSON file. And if you don't really want to use the test case source, you can directly use this fashion where it's going to read all the data from the JSON file and then pass the value into the login model. And there may be one caveat that I wanted to show you again is that what if you change the username of the login model from username like this to a small n. So this is the mistake which I have seen many students try to make it, like while they try to deserialize, the property name will be different from that of the JSON value. So you see that the JSON value has got the username U as capital and N as capital, but the property, you don't have it defined like N as capital letter, it's in small letter. And also the error is happening because there is other areas that we have used the username as like this probably. So if I keep changing all the places here, and now if I try to run this test, you will notice that the test is just going to run, but it is not going to fetch the data because the fetching is going to fail here. It says that the test cannot be converted because the test is like null over there. And this is happening because the actual deserialization fails here to perform the deserialization, as the matching property is not quite right as that of the login.json file. So in order to get around the problem, you need to do some more operation, something like a deserialization options that you have to pass within the deserialization that we are trying to do over here. So once you hit a space, you see that there is something called as a deserializer option. And within this deserializer option, we have to say new of the JSON deserializer option, and we have to pass what are the options that we want to use. So you can say property name case insensitive. So if you do property name in case insensitive as true, which means this time it is going to start reading it. But again, because this is just a basic course, I don't want to keep you too much confused about all these operations. So that is, guys, this is how we can work with a JSON value using NUnit data source, and how we can read the data for the data driven testing. And hope that makes sense for the data driven testing in Selenium in much easier fashion. Catch you in the next one.